start by asking you what it is about the relationship between the guru and the novice that could create this potential for this misconduct, this situation.
Well, in Tibetan Buddhism particularly, very central to the whole idea of one's practice and one's identity as a Buddhist has to do with the relationship you have to your teacher, the Lama, which in Tibetan means guru. Now, once you have taken certain teachings, particularly when you've been initiated into the tantric practices, then the relationship with the Lama or the Guru is something that is very sacred, that you submit wholeheartedly to the authority of the Guru, not that particular person necessarily, but as standing for the lineage of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and other enlightened beings who have brought this particular practice into your life today. And that the Guru, the Lama, is very much the conduit, is very much the portal for that relationship you have with the tradition. So there's an importance of surrendering, of giving yourself to that authority as a means to receive what they call the blessings, to receive what they call the blessings of the lineage itself.
If the Guru is perhaps, it's seen as enlightened, but perhaps is not, or has certain habits of his own, and a young woman, say, comes from a very dysfunctional background, is that when it turns sour? Is that what can happen?
I think it's a system that is wide open to misuse. You have, for a start, a great cultural gap between the expectations and the understanding of the teacher, the guru, and the background and the expectations of a student, particularly if that student is a young woman with little exposure to Buddhism, with perhaps all kinds of personal issues that they've come to Buddhism to work with. It's very unclear exactly what's going on in the nature of this relationship. Because the student will have given a great deal of authority to the teacher, and because the teacher is quite at home in that role, then of course the teacher will feel that the student, should follow him in whatever ways that he wants to develop their relationship. And in Tantric Buddhism, this can lead to sexual relations. These relations should be framed within the strictures of Vajrayana Buddhism, but of course human beings being human beings, personal interests are very likely to have a role as well.
You have a wonderful image of your book, in the 1960s in India, of two worlds colliding, of the Tibetans and the Westerners. And I just wonder, you said they smashed over India like particles in an accelerator. And I wonder how much that collision is at the root of some of these stories of sexual misconduct. Is there any connection there?
Well, I think what happened in the 1960s, largely in India, when you had two sets of exiles colliding with one another. You had the Tibetans who were fleeing the invasion of their country by the communist Chinese, and at the same time you had a generation of rather privileged but disaffected Westerners fleeing the war in Vietnam, fleeing consumerist capitalism, and ending up in places like India. Now, it was in a sense coincidental that these two groups of people came together at the same time, and they both needed each other. The Tibetans were adrift in the world. They needed people to rally to their cause, to help them re-establish their culture in exile, and the Westerners, or many of them, were seeking some kind of spiritual enlightenment, and the Tibetans and other teachers in India were seen as those who would provide this. So there were two quite different needs encountering one another. And I don't think that either side, particularly then, was at all aware of the social dynamic that was going on. I think we certainly projected all kinds of ideals onto Tibetan lamas. I think for many of us, Tibetan lamas were quite simply the most impressive people we'd met. Certainly in those times in the 60s, 70s, you had these men who had been trained in Tibet, had had no influence from modern culture, and who were excellent examples of their traditions and what they stood for. But we didn't really understand the mechanics of the social, political and economic realities that informed their culture. And I don't think they really had a clue where we were coming from, frankly.
Within the other traditions of Buddhism, are there potential problems in other areas?
Well, I think you'll always have a problem when you have a male figure who holds complete authority in the religious sphere, and you have a student, maybe an attractive young woman student, who has no power at all. And as soon as you have that dynamic, then there's always going to be the possibility of that trust from the student being abused or being turned into an opportunity for the male figure to embark on a sexual relationship, which may be entirely inappropriate, even according to the rules of the monastic order to which they belong. The big difference with the Tibetan schools is that you do have, within the teachings themselves, legitimation of sexual relations as being part of the path. None of the other Buddhist schools would acknowledge that as even being a possibility. I think the schools of Buddhism where the emphasis is on the teacher as a monk, as a celibate monk, there tend to be less charges of abuse. In the Tibetan tradition, because many of the tantric lamas are not monks and are thereby not beholden to vows of celibacy or whatever, that they are laymen in that sense, then of course there's no formal there is no formal forbidding of sexual relations. So that muddies the waters considerably.